It was a crisp Monday morning when 14-year-old Mia Porter walked into the prestigious Oaked Bank, dressed in her school uniform, a simple blazer, skirt, and loafers. Mia felt both nervous and proud. Today, she would make her first solo bank deposit, handling the $5,000 scholarship check she had earned through her outstanding academic performance. The money was a testament to her hard work, but it also symbolized her independence. She was determined to handle this transaction on her own, without her parents' help. Mia approached the counter with the check, her heart racing as she clutched her folder of documents. Behind the teller, the manager, Victoria Hayes, a woman in her late 40s with impeccable fashion and an air of superiority, noticed Mia's arrival. Her gaze immediately sharpened. As Mia handed over the check, Victoria's professional smile faltered for just a moment. A $5,000 check. Victoria's voice rose slightly, enough for nearby customers to hear. For a student your age, where did this come from? Mia felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but quickly regained her composure. It's my academic scholarship, she explained calmly, her hands trembling slightly as she handed over the award letter and her school ID. I have all the documentation right here. The teller, a young man named Tom, took the check from her, his expression shifting from neutral to suspicious. He held it up to the light, inspecting it like a detective searching for a clue. After a few long seconds, he turned to Victoria, who had been watching the interaction with growing skepticism. Victoria walked over to the counter, not even glancing at Mia. We've had a lot of fraudulent checks recently, she muttered, her tone dripping with disdain. I'll need to verify everything. Mia's anxiety spiked. She had been expecting a simple deposit, but now she was being treated as though she were a criminal. She looked down at her bag, realizing in a rush of panic that her phone was still sitting in her locker at school. I need to call my mom, Mia said, her voice cracking slightly. She's expecting me home soon. I don't have a phone here. Victoria barely spared her a glance. That's not our problem, she snapped, her tone cold and dismissive. You'll wait until we finish our verification process. The word stung. Mia stood motionless as Victoria turned away, the condescension evident in her every step. The bank manager walked to a corner, her arms crossed, her expression smug as she observed Mia, standing in the middle of the busy lobby. Mia's heart pounded as she was left standing in the corner, unable to move. Around her, the hustle and bustle of the bank continued, but she felt as if the entire room was watching her. Whispers began to circulate among the other customers, some glancing her way with open curiosity, others with barely concealed judgment. She stood there for what felt like an eternity as the minutes ticked by, the humiliation deepening. Every second felt like an eternity, the marble floor beneath her feet growing colder with each passing minute. Despite the situation, Mia's mind remained sharp. She had always been observant, taking note of the way people interacted with one another, the subtle differences in treatment, the way some people were treated with deference while others were ignored or brushed aside. She had noticed it before, but today she was living it. She wanted to scream, to demand that they give her back her documents, but she remained silent. Her father had always taught her to remain composed in the face of adversity, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the way she was being treated had nothing to do with the legitimacy of her scholarship and everything to do with the way she looked. From across the room, Mia could hear Victoria speaking to Tom in a low, almost conspiratorial voice. I'm telling you, we need to maintain our standards here, Victoria said. We can't just let anyone walk in and expect to be treated like they belong. Mia's heart sank. The words stung like a slap across her face. She was being judged not for who she was, but for how she looked. Her hands clenched into fists, and she fought to keep her composure. She had worked hard for this scholarship. She had earned it fair and square, and now it felt like it was slipping away from her. She glanced at the clock on the wall. More time passed. The whispers continued. The only thing she could do now was wait. Mia Porter wasn't your average teenager. Despite living in Oak Ridge's most exclusive neighborhood, she had always valued simplicity over extravagance. Her family's home was elegant but understated. No ostentatious displays of wealth, just tastefully decorated rooms and a strong sense of community. Mia's mother, Dr. Naomi Porter, was a renowned financial expert who ran one of the most respected firms in the country. As a woman who had built her career from the ground up, Naomi had instilled in Mia a strong sense of independence and a belief that true success came from effort, not privilege. The Porter's wealth was substantial, but it wasn't flaunted. Dr. Naomi Porter believed in the power of education and hard work. She often reminded Mia that wealth wasn't just about accumulating money. It was about using that wealth for good. Mia had absorbed these lessons well, excelling in her studies and winning a full scholarship to Westra Academy, a prestigious school known for its rigorous academics. This wasn't an achievement handed to her on a silver platter. Mia had worked tirelessly, earning her scholarship on merit, not on the strength of her mother's name. Her friends often marveled at her ability to balance academics, extracurriculars, and part-time work, but Mia didn't mind. She relished the challenge. It was her way of proving to herself and to the world that she could succeed on her own. Her mother had always been supportive, of course, but she never allowed Mia to take shortcuts. "I want you to have the same opportunities that others have," Naomi would say, "but I also want you to stand on your own 2 feet." Mia's decision to handle her bank deposit on her own was another step toward independence. She was 14, but she felt like she was ready to navigate the world as an adult. The scholarship check, which was the culmination of her hard work, felt like a symbol of her growing maturity. Earlier that morning, before heading to the bank, Mia had placed the check carefully in her folder. Her mother had sat at the breakfast table, reviewing some of her firm's financial reports, but she had paused to smile at Mia. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" Naomi asked, her voice warm but with a hint of concern. "I've got it, Mom," Mia replied with quiet confidence. "I'm 14 now. It's time I learned to do this on my own." Her mother had nodded, her eyes filled with pride. Naomi knew that Mia was more than capable, and yet she couldn't help but worry. It was a mother's instinct, the desire to shield her child from harm, especially when the world could sometimes be harsh and unkind. Mia had reassured her, "I'll be fine. I'll go in, make the deposit, and be back before you even finish your meeting." It had seemed like such a simple task. Mia never imagined that just walking into a bank to deposit a scholarship check would lead to such an ordeal. As she waited in the corner of the bank, Mia couldn't help but reflect on the lessons her mother had taught her. She had always been raised to believe in fairness and equality, to treat people with respect, and to expect the same in return. But as she stood there, isolated and humiliated, she realized that the world didn't always play by the same rules. Mia had been forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that her appearance, her race, was a factor in how she was treated. It wasn't something she had fully understood before today. Growing up in Oak Ridge, she had never experienced discrimination like this. Sure, she had heard about it, read about it in books, but it always seemed so distant, so theoretical. Today, it was her reality. She glanced again at the clock, her anxiety rising. She had already been waiting far too long. Her mind raced. Why hadn't anyone come to check on her? Why was she still standing in the corner when all she had done was bring in a legitimate check to deposit? The longer she stood there, the more she felt the weight of the situation pressing on her shoulders. Her mother would expect her home soon. She needed to call her, but that, too, was denied. Time passed slowly in the corner where Mia stood, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The marble floors felt cold beneath her feet, and the constant ticking of the wall clock seemed to amplify her growing sense of isolation. People came and went, but no one spoke to her. She was nothing more than an invisible figure, a source of silent judgment in the heart of the busy bank. As Mia stood there, her mind began to race. She glanced at the other customers, some of whom were being treated with obvious favoritism. A well-dressed elderly couple walked in, greeted with warmth and respect by Victoria Hayes, who personally escorted them to a VIP area. Not once did Mia receive such an acknowledgement. It was as if she didn't belong in this space, this world of polished marble and mahogany wood. A few minutes later, a young man with a thick accent came to the counter, paperwork in hand. Victoria, who had been watching him from across the room, immediately waved him away with a dismissive gesture. "Sorry, the system is running slow today. It'll take a while to process your request," she said, her voice dripping with indifference. Mia watched, her stomach parla, clearly frustrated. Yet, when a white couple entered just moments later with similar paperwork, Victoria's attitude shifted completely. She practically beamed as she ushered them to the counter. "Of course, let me take care of that for you right away," she said, her voice smooth and eager. You're in good hands here. Mia's chest tightened with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just poor customer service. This was something more sinister, something deeply rooted in bias. She knew exactly what was happening. Victoria was picking and choosing who to treat with respect, and she had made it clear that Mia didn't belong. Her hands clenched at her sides as she forced herself to remain still, refusing to let her emotions spill over. She had seen this behavior before, subtle, insidious discrimination disguised as customer service, but never had she felt it so personally, so painfully. It was as if the entire bank had turned its back on her simply because of the color of her skin. Victoria's voice cut through the air again, this time addressing the security guard standing near Mia. Keep an eye on her, she instructed, her tone cool and authoritative. Make sure she doesn't try to leave. Mia's heart pounded. She had to resist the urge to shout at the injustice of it all. Instead, she focused on her breathing, trying to stay calm, trying to block out the hurt that threatened to overwhelm her. She had been taught to handle difficult situations with grace, but today, everything felt different. Today, she was trapped in a system that didn't see her as a person but as an inconvenience. Minutes stretched into hours, the only sound the occasional rustle of paper, the distant murmur of polite conversation, and the sharp clicking of Victoria's heels on the marble floor. Mia couldn't escape the sensation that she was being watched, that everyone in the bank was observing her, judging her. The murmurs grew louder, more frequent. Mia could hear snippets of conversation, snide remarks, whispers of pity, and a few barely concealed chuckles. She felt small. She felt powerless. The worst part, she wasn't sure if anyone cared. No one had come to her defense. No one had stepped in to question why she was being treated this way. It was as though her suffering was invisible to them, just part of the background noise of a world that had learned to ignore injustice. Then, just as Mia's mind was beginning to unravel from the sheer weight of the situation, something caught her eye. Victoria was speaking to Tom, the teller, in hushed tones, her face tight with frustration. Why is she still here? Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to get rid of her. Make sure she knows that she's not welcome. Mia's stomach dropped. She had heard enough. Victoria's words confirmed what she had feared all along. This wasn't just about a misplaced check or a minor mistake. It was about something much darker. It was about power, control, and the assumption that people like Mia didn't belong in spaces like this. She was an outsider, an inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with. As Victoria turned away, Mia couldn't stop herself from speaking up. I'm not a problem, she said, her voice shaking but steady. I'm here because I earned the scholarship. I'm here to deposit my check, just like everyone else. Victoria didn't even glance in her direction. Instead, she turned to the security guard, her voice low and commanding. Take her to the back. Keep her there until we finish with the paperwork. The security guard, a large man with an intimidating presence, approached Mia without hesitation. His hand gripped her arm tightly, and he began marching her across the bank floor. Every eye in the room turned to watch, but no one intervened. Mia felt the blood rush to her face as she was forcibly escorted away from the teller counter, her heart racing with a mix of anger and humiliation. Stand here, the guard ordered, positioning her in a corner near the back of the room, where she was visible to everyone but out of the way. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the room, making sure she stayed in place. Mia stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her back straight, and her head held high. But inside, she was falling apart. As she stood in the corner, her body aching from hours of forced stillness, her thoughts began to spiral. The harsh reality of the situation weighed heavily on her. She had been humiliated, treated like an outcast in a place she had expected to be treated fairly. Every passing minute seemed to stretch on forever, and the longer she was forced to wait, the more she realized that something was deeply wrong. Mia's eyes flicked around the bank, searching for something, anything, that might offer a distraction from the overwhelming sense of injustice. Her gaze landed on the manager, Victoria Hayes, who had been circulating around the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. She was speaking to a well-dressed man, tall and imposing, who Mia didn't recognize at first. But something about his demeanor struck her as familiar. He was someone important, and judging by the way Victoria was speaking to him, he was someone she was eager to please. The man's name clicked in Mia's mind like a bell: Harrison Wells. The name had been mentioned by her mother before, in passing, when talking about business rivalries. Harrison Wells was the CEO of Meridian Banking Group, one of the largest competitors to the bank her mother had recently acquired. Mia's pulse quickened as she watched the exchange between Victoria and Wells. She wasn't close enough to hear their conversation clearly, but she could tell it was something serious. Victoria leaned in toward Wells, her voice lowering to a near whisper as she handed him a manila folder. Mia's heart raced as she observed the interaction. The folder was clearly marked with the word confidential, and though she couldn't make out the contents, it was obvious that whatever was inside was important. Mia's mind was reeling. She had seen her mother work for years, building the trust and reputation of the bank, and she knew that any breach of confidence could be catastrophic. This was no simple business meeting. This was something more, a betrayal in the making. She shifted slightly in her corner, straining to hear more, but her position was far from ideal. Still, she kept her eyes locked on the two figures. Wells nodded as he looked through the folder, his expression serious, even pleased. He said something to Victoria, his words too low to make out, but the smile that stretched across her face told Mia everything she needed to know. Victoria wasn't just helping Wells. She was actively working against her own company, her own employer. Mia's stomach churned. It was becoming clearer by the second. Victoria wasn't just mistreating her because of her race or her age. She was using her position at the bank to sabotage it. Mia had no idea what was in that folder, but she knew it wasn't good, and she knew it had something to do with her mother's company. She felt a sudden surge of determination. No longer just a passive observer, Mia understood that she had to act. She wasn't just here to deposit a check anymore. She had stumbled upon something much bigger, something that could affect her mother's life and career. She couldn't just stand idly by. Her eyes flicked down to the leather-bound notebook she always carried with her. She had taken notes throughout her time at the bank, jotting down the discriminatory treatment she had witnessed. But this was different. This was critical. She had to document everything she had seen, every detail, every whisper. Mia had no idea what she could do with the information, but she knew she had to keep a record. She had to be prepared. As Victoria and Wells continued their hushed conversation, Mia quickly opened her notebook, her fingers trembling as she wrote. She noted the time, the names, and the suspicious folder, everything she had observed in those few moments. The conversation between the two ended abruptly when Wells stood to leave. Victoria shook his hand with a smile, her demeanor almost too eager. Mia's heart pounded as Wells walked past her toward the exit, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Once he was gone, Victoria returned to her usual position behind the counter, but her smile was gone. She was focused, her attention now entirely on Mia, who remained standing in the corner. Mia felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if Victoria knew she had witnessed everything. Mia's thoughts raced. She had seen enough to know that something sinister was going on behind the scenes. But what could she do with this information? How could she prove what had happened? Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand, determination setting in. She had been wronged, yes, but now she had a chance to make things right. Not just for herself, but for her mother, for her family, and for everyone else who had been unfairly treated by Victoria Hayes. Mia wouldn't let this go. Mia stood silently as the weight of the situation bore down on her. Hours of waiting, hours of humiliation, had built to this moment. She had been wronged, treated as though she didn't belong, but now she had something far more valuable than her check or her documents. She had the truth, and it was time to make that truth known. As if summoned by her thoughts, the bank doors opened, and in walked her mother, Naomi Porter. Mia's heart skipped a beat. Naomi's presence was magnetic. She was calm, composed, and dressed impeccably, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded in the bank. Victoria Hayes, who had been overseeing Mia's ordeal, stood up straight as soon as she saw Naomi. "Miss Porter," Victoria greeted her, her voice dripping with feigned politeness. "I wasn't expecting you today. How can I assist you?" But Naomi didn't respond with pleasantries. She turned immediately to Mia, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of her daughter standing alone, still isolated in the corner. A flash of anger crossed Naomi's face before she masked it with a calm exterior. "Mia, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Mia nodded, fighting to keep her emotions in check. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside her. "But there's something you need to know." Mia pulled out her leather-bound notebook and began recounting everything she had observed during her time in the bank. The preferential treatment shown to white customers, the cold indifference shown to her, and, most importantly, the conversation between Victoria and Harrison Wells. She read aloud from her notes, her voice unwavering as she recounted the suspicious meeting and the folder marked confidential. Naomi listened intently, her face hardening with each word. When Mia finished, Naomi turned to Victoria, her gaze sharp. "Miss Hayes," Naomi said, her tone icy, "I believe you owe my daughter an apology. And I think you owe me an explanation." Victoria's confident facade began to crack. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but Naomi cut her off. "I know exactly what you've been doing," Naomi replied, her voice controlled but firm. "You've been conspiring with Harrison Wells, handing over confidential information to a competitor. This isn't just a case of poor customer service. This is corporate espionage." The bank fell silent. No one moved. Mia watched as Victoria's face turned pale, her composure crumbling under the weight of Naomi's words. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but couldn't find the words. Naomi didn't give her the chance. "You're fired, Miss Hayes," she said, effective immediately. The words landed with a finality that seemed to echo throughout the bank. Security was called, and the large guard who had earlier escorted Mia to the corner now moved toward Victoria. "Please escort Miss Hayes out," Naomi instructed. As Victoria was led away, her pride fully shattered, Naomi turned back to the room. "This institution will undergo a full review," Naomi said, her voice commanding. "We will implement changes to ensure that no one is treated with the same disrespect my daughter was today." No one. The room was still. Mia's heart beat steadily in her chest as she watched her mother take control of the situation, her strength a pillar Mia had always admired. The next few months were a blur of changes at the bank. The investigation into Victoria's actions uncovered not only her attempts to sabotage Naomi's business, but also a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The bank's leadership was overhauled, and a new training program on equitable banking practices was put in place. As for Melody Pham, the young teller who had shown Mia kindness during her ordeal, she was promoted to a managerial role. Mia's experience became a turning point, not just for the bank, but for her as well. She was invited to speak at Westra Academy, where she shared her story with other students. Mia used her voice to advocate for financial literacy and the importance of equality in all spaces. Standing before her peers, she smiled, knowing that her painful experience had shaped her into someone who could stand up for others. She had turned her moment of humiliation into a platform for change, and her mother's example had taught her that even in the face of injustice, it was possible to make a difference.